if you didn't have to worry about that, if you had the guarantee of being able to take time off when you needed, think about you might be more entrepreneurial. You might start a business. You might feel more creative. You might think of whole new opportunities and trajectories in your life. And again, that actually does ultimately benefit all of us.
Welcome to another inspiring episode of our podcast. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Dawn Huckelbridge, a powerhouse advocate who's been reshaping the conversation around paid leave in America. As the founding director of Paid Leave for All, Dawn has been at the forefront of one of the most crucial workplace policy battles of our time. Under Dawn's leadership, Paid Leave for All has built a remarkable coalition of organizations, bringing together advocates, business leaders, and policymakers to fight for a basic right that most developed nations already guarantee. Her work has been instrumental in elevating paid leave from a side issue to a national priority. Here's something we all need to understand. Paid leave isn't just someone else's issue, it's everyone's issue. Whether it's welcoming a new child, recovering from surgery, or caring for an aging parent, life inevitably presents moments when we need time away from our work without sacrificing our financial security. Yet millions of Americans still face impossible choices between their health, their families, and their paychecks. Before we dive into our conversation with Dawn about her vision for a more compassionate workplace culture in America, we want to remind you that if you're enjoying our deep dives into these crucial social issues, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening to it. And you can give us a review up to 5 stars on Apple and Spotify. That's one of the best and free ways to support this channel. Also, for those who want early access to our content and other exclusive insights, please subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the description. Now, let's welcome Dawn Huckelbridge.
Dawn Huckelbridge, welcome so much to the podcast. I'm so honored to have you here because you've been such an inspiration for us. Welcome.
Thank you. And likewise, I've been a huge fan, and I think a lot of America is now too.
Oh, thank you. Well, Dawn, where are you calling in from today?
I am calling in from lovely Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. We're experiencing some winter mix outside. But yeah, I live in a great neighborhood on Capitol Hill.
I kind of want to open with a heavy hitter. I do.
All
I do,
right.
because this is the question that, we've shared content about, paid leave. And the first thing people ask, and we were hit actually again just yesterday, if you look at the studies, it shows that it will increase GDP, and people ask, well, how can this benefit society as a whole? So that's the first thing people always want to know when they hear paid leave. Can you kind of help us understand that, or help our viewers understand
Yeah, pull up the sleeves.
All right. So this is my favorite topic, is that, I love paid leave, studied it a bit, knew about it, of course, earlier in my life. But when I got this job to launch this campaign, the more I learned about it, it just became to me this, Senator Gillibrand calls it an elegant solution to so many different problems in our society. So it is a powerful tool for protecting public health. So if you think about it, if people have access to the care that they need, they're going to have better recovery rates. They're going to stay home when they're sick. They're not going to spread illness. They're going to be able to get their treatments. They're going to have better cancer outcomes. They're going to have way better maternal health, maternal mortality outcomes, infant mortality, all of these things. If people are able to both recover and to be there to care for and bond with their loved ones, everyone's going to benefit. And it's not just families, it extends to communities and then whole countries, et cetera. So great for public health. I think this came into a big focus during COVID as a really vivid illustration of how everyone is connected in a community. And then, yes, you're right. It is a really powerful tool for economic growth, financial security for families, and then again, for whole countries. So we know that if a business has paid leave, particularly if it is a program that is supported by the federal government, it means they're going to retain better workers, talented workers. They're going to be able to keep them. They're not going to have those costs of turnover and training and finding new people. And then we find actually that workers, this is kind of common sense, are more productive. Happier workers, healthier workers are better for everybody, better for bottom lines and for individual workers' security, of course. So there's higher rates of, as I said, productivity, performance, and then profitability. So there's a million studies on how there is a positive return on the investment It puts more money into the economy as a whole. There's more, as you said, GDP, economic activity. There's, I think, hundreds of billions. I think it was 800 billion more in economic activity in the last study. And so this is something that, as I said, benefits everybody. But also the thing I think is interesting too is, we talk a lot about equity, how it makes the economy more fair. It levels the playing field. It also just opens up possibilities for all of us. Think about, I can certainly look back and think of jobs I had to take because I wanted to get pregnant or I wanted, this or that benefit. If you didn't have to worry about that, if you had the guarantee of being able to take time off when you needed, think about, you might be more entrepreneurial. You might start a business. You might feel more creative. You might think of whole new opportunities and trajectories in your life. And again, that actually does ultimately benefit all of us.
And to play a little devil's advocate on current events, you might actually want to have more babies. Go figure.
Yeah.
You might have the support to have that bigger family that you wanted.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's true.
So some of these,
I would have had more kids if I'd had more paid leave for sure. So there you go.
Yeah.
I'm curious. These obviously we brought you on because we love what you do. So I'm going to be the person in the audience who's just kind of like, wait a second, because these are the questions that people want to ask. These studies that they had about the GDP and about the benefits, were they done in countries that already have paid leave? And if so, do you know what countries those were?
Yeah, they've compared them to European countries where there are things like paid leave, a lot of it, where there is access to affordable childcare, where there is preschool. You all know this well from your bits.
Yeah.
And you can see the difference of keeping more women and caregivers in the workforce. And I will add, it is about babies, but it's going to be about all of us. In the US, as baby boomers age, and many of us are going to be more and more in the sandwich generation of caring for kids and caring for parents, caring for other loved ones all at once, this crisis is going to get worse and worse.
Very much so.
We're in it right now.
Yeah. And I kind of see it as, I think everyone can understand, and I always mix up the two. Medicare is for the elderly, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Everyone kind of buys into the idea of Medicare. They're like, yeah, people are older, they're going to need health care. But no one ever says this person is sicker and they're using more Medicare than I did. No one ever goes into that debate. But someone will easily say with paid leave for all, well, they decided to have 5 kids and I didn't want to have any kids. But this isn't only just about children. Like you said, if you need to take care of a loved one, you don't know what you're going to run into. And I also look at people have the debate, well, they get Medicare because they worked and they paid for it. Well, let's just say this baby that's coming into the world, why would you hold them to a standard of saying you need to work and pay for it before you get any benefits? Because most people are going to contribute to society. So it's kind of the opposite, where it's like, okay, yes, you're going to take a little bit when you're born because your parents are going to be able to take time off and take care of you. However, you're going to then contribute that back and be a contributing part of society. And so that's what, obviously I see how it works in Europe. But I think people look at this as, people are stealing. And it's like, no, it's never going to be 100% equal. But overall, the average is we all benefit from it, like Medicare.
Yeah. And I think some of it, there's a Congressman Jimmy Gomez always says this, and I like it, that when idea feels new, it often feels radical to us. We're just not used to it, And then all of a sudden it becomes possible, and then all of a sudden it happens, and it feels like it was inevitable, that it's just something we're suddenly used to. And I think that's true for a lot of things, a lot of big, changes that have happened in policy in the last, forever. So I do think once you get used to something like Social Security or Medicare, and you take it for granted, you quickly acclimate and understand the value, especially when you start enjoying the benefits. And I think that's true, in the states that have passed paid leave, the sky didn't fall down. Once people had it and they started getting checks when they needed it, people like it. It makes them believe in government and the power of it to help our lives. So I think, I agree that this is something we just have to get people, we have to correct these misconceptions. We have to get people accustomed to it, understand how helpful it is when you have it, when you need it. And also the whole idea that, this whole thing that I deserve my own wealth, I earned it, there's so many resources that we all share as a society, from, the air we breathe, the roads we drive on. And I think that we have to just make people better make that connection between we're all connected once again, and we all benefit from these shared resources.
Well, I can feel your passion about the subject, and that's what's always drawn me to you. Was there a moment in your life that was kind of a catalyst for this passion to get ignited?
Yeah. Again, it was something, gender and politics and policy is something I've always been passionate about and interested in. But it was when I became pregnant and when I gave birth that I think I often say it kind of like smacked me in the face what a failure it is in the United States. I think that is why your video really resonated with people. Is I hear that story all the time. It wasn't until it happened to me that I realized this is a problem. I remember after I gave birth, it's like the second you have the baby, you just feel this change. Everyone's focused on the baby and they're giving you diapers and blankets and piles of literature. I remember I kept saying, but what about me? How do I take care of myself? And we don't tell the truth about that. We don't say how long it takes to recover. We don't say how hard postpartum can be. We don't provide any of the resources that most of the world does. And I felt, even with all of the privilege that I had, I did have a little bit of paid leave. I did have health insurance. I had family, all of these things. I still felt totally alone. And the sickest I've ever felt, the most desperate I've ever felt, didn't have the easiest baby in the world. And I kept thinking, if it's this hard for me, what about all of these people, 3 and 4 workers who don't have any paid family leave guaranteed through their jobs? So that was when it really felt drastic.
Mm-hmm. I obviously didn't go through labor, but did become a parent. And I understand this shock and gap. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you step back, especially our experience of, going to other countries and seeing what's available. But you realize, you go, okay, so we have a child and there is no support at all until basically 5 years old. And, right now the current stance of the government is we want more babies. And it's like, okay, I can say, yeah, sure, people have babies. That's great. I mean, you should be able to decide if you want babies or not. But this just huge gap is so hard for people to make the leap. I mean, to get the child to school, and then even when they are in school, I mean, obviously kids are hard. I'm not going to say like, yes, they need to be taken care of. There's a struggle there. But like you said, we're in this sandwich generation where we're taking care of our parents. We're also taking care of kids. And we're just sitting here going, we just want a little help.
Yeah. Well, and our policies just haven't kept up with a 21st century economy or reality, which is that you can't often afford to have a person at home being a full-time caregiver. And, we talk a lot about this just wasn't made. The school ends, at 2 or 3 o'clock, and most people have to be at work later than that. Or, it's just the country, I should say, needs to catch up to the reality of working families today.
It's such a debate. And I've had this debate initially about, okay, and I get that it's like this convoluted question/problem. Some people will say, and I don't have all the stats, so forgive me. Some people say, oh, well, people are just spending money more frivolously now. They have the dual incomes and they're asking for more. They're going on more vacations. Mm-hmm. But when you start to look at some of the numbers, and it's like, no, it just doesn't add up anymore. The idea of my dad, we lived in a town that was a General Motors town. Mm-hmm. And the idea of going to college, actually, my grandparents thought that my uncle was lazy because he wanted to go to college. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the mindset, because everyone went to General Motors and they got taken care of and you had a pension, and that doesn't exist anymore. No. And also the housing. I mean, if you look at, okay, people are like, well, we're spending more on housing, or you want more bigger houses. And it's like, there's some subtleties, but it's also the fact that we haven't kept up with the housing. So there's all these different of the building of the housing, the permits. I mean, our house, I look at our house, it's valued what it is, partially because of the restriction of the ability to build around us. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have built a few houses, but there's a lot of land that hasn't been developed. Yeah. And that you see that across the U.S. So there's all these different things that add up to the point that you brought into is it's very difficult to have, 2 people working and have the kids. And so that's why if you look at the studies, a lot of millennials are deciding to reduce the amount of kids or to delay or to not have children because it's such a financial burden and it's so difficult to have kids.
Yeah.
And you can look at it from both sides. And it's like, this is an issue that it's very difficult to address.
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting, the generational divide too, that, our avocado toasts and our
Exactly. Yeah.
one or no children, it's just so frivolous. But yeah, to your point, I mean, the fact that housing prices have, how many times have they multiplied? And the cost of tuition, I mean, I can't even imagine by the time my kid, if he wants to go to college, if it's like $1 million, I don't know what's going to happen. So
Yeah, the idea of, you work your way through college, like, it's not possible.
It makes sense that I think a lot of us have turned to valuing experience, as I think you both do, because there's just, ownership is not a given anymore in our society, and the same lifestyle is not even possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a tricky, I think I want to say all those things so that our listeners understand, like, this isn't just a simple solution to just say, okay, just give paid leave for all and it's going to solve all the issues. It is a very complicated problem that all of us are going through. I mean, I years ago thought that it was just, I was more of the belief of, like, put your boots on and get to work. And then, over the years, you start seeing things and realizing, like, I mean, we're fortunate where we are and in our financial state and everything, but also you can see the gaps and the problems that are there and how it is different. It's not just that we're spending more on avocado toast. It's not that. It is a very complicated subject that requires a lot of that all of us are going through. And the sandwich generation is struggling right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you look around the world, I mean, we're one of the only countries in the world without paid leave, because I think a lot of people, we hear a lot of feedback on both sides, and they'll say, like, oh, well, I don't want to have European politics. And it's like, well, it's not just Europe that does it. It's like everywhere, everyone, except for, 6 countries or...
Yeah, they keep like slightly changing the count. I think the
Yeah.
last was one of 7, I think was the latest. They keep discovering, small island nations. There's the stat that is often used, I correct for exactly your point. A lot of people say we're one of the only industrialized. I say, no, we're simply one of the only. We are such a dramatic outlier that, we need to be clear about this is something people take for granted around the world.
Now, in these successful paid leave programs around the world, how are they modeled? Are they modeled via businesses, or is it through the government?
There are different. I think many are through the government. I think that much of the world assumes and appreciates and values the role of government in our lives, which is why there have been so many more kids. Because to your point, they have healthcare, they have preschool, they can afford childcare, they have months and months of paid leave. So I think it's really important that in America, we again understand how valuable government really is and can be.
And I think we should share some examples. I know that when we just spoke with Maria, who's from Denmark, and I can't remember the details of if it was through her business or government, but she had a year, 18 months?
Part of it was through the government, and then her business offered her more. So she ended up staying home for more than a year.
Yeah.
Paid, which was amazing.
Which I know that's not a shock for us, but I just so our listeners know, like, there's a lot of countries out there where you get 6 months, a year of paid leave where you have a baby, and like you said, there's other situations. Maybe you need to take care of a loved one, but let's just use the baby example, and you get to stay home, and you're earning some either full wage or some portion of your wage, so that you're not just losing that income for your whole family.
Yeah, and if you think about it for a baby, it's just also like common sense when you think about child development. I mean, kids can't even get vaccinated, before the child care center they have to be vaccinated before you can even get child care.
Yeah.
Thinking about like breastfeeding, the practicalities of that. We've now been told, I think we should breastfeed 6 months or a year. Anyway. It just like none of these numbers add up.
Yeah.
It's not possible for parents to manage it all at all.
And when you think about how to be successful as a human, I know in our generation we're always taught, work hard in school, go to university, get the job, do all these things. And then you have a child and you have no roadmap on success there. You're told breastfeed, but go back to work. It's like all these hypocritical...
Breastfeed, but don't do it in public.
Yeah.
But get out, and be social.
And so I've said in the video that you're talking about, expected to mother like we don't work and work like we don't mother. Because I feel like I'm taking crazy pills after I have a kid. I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah.
I'm expected to do all of these contradictory things. How am I supposed to get ahead? How is my child supposed to get ahead when there's no clear path to success? It's like these grand ideas with no implementation of an actual action plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I saw paid leave offering hope. And I know that you were really close to passing it in the past. Can you share how close you were?
I would say we were one vote away, a vote that we actually thought we had for quite a while. So paid leave, paid family and medical leave passed for the first time in the House of Representatives in 2021. It just couldn't move on to the Senate because they knew that they didn't have, in particular, Senator Joe Manchin. May have been another problem or two, but he was the real holdout. He was the reason paid leave was dropped from the package, and it was a whole roller coaster story of in and out and up and down, and it's gonna pass, it's not. So we came really, really close though. And so I like to remind people that even when things feel very hard or far away, it can happen like that. Opportunities come up when you never know. So in our political landscape right now, I don't think it's on the immediate horizon. But again, things can change quickly, and our goal is to be ready as soon as the next opportunity comes. Because we were really close, and there was a lot of momentum. I mean, it is one of the most politically popular issues in the country. The last poll we did, which was in Battlegrounds, had 91% of voters behind it, federal paid leave policy. So we're going to keep pushing. Yeah.
So it's not just a one-sided issue. You're saying it's a bipartisan issue.
Oh yeah. Super majorities. I mean, any demographic or political party or anything you look at, we just for fun, sometimes I keep pulling out more. It's like 95% of non-college men and 89% of suburban, it's like anytime you look at it, it is super majority, is near universal support.
Could you walk us through some of the details of what the plan was or what it will be?
Well, so we are, also it's important to say because it's confusing. A lot of people, it's understandably confusing because there's paid sick days, there's paid medical leave, there's paid family leave, there's paid time off, there's paid vacation. Frankly, we need all of them. But the policy that we specifically have been fighting for at Paid Leave for All is a federal paid family and medical leave policy, which means that if you or if someone you love, someone you care for, needs you, if you have a serious medical condition, that you can take the time away from work without losing your job and with a paycheck. And the bill that has been around for quite a while, the Family Act, would give up to 12 weeks of paid leave. During the negotiations that I mentioned in 2021, that kept getting negotiated down because there was pushback on the dollar amount on the whole package. So it ended up being 4 weeks, which is not sufficient, but what we felt is how could we look someone in the eye who had 0 days and say we turned down a chance at 4 weeks for you. So we're back at fighting for more and going to get whatever we can get as soon as we can. Yeah.
And would the funding come from governments or the company?
So I think this is important because people often think it's just a mandate, that it's just forcing businesses to pay out of pocket. And what it actually would be is a program administered by the federal government. There's different ways you can fund it. It could be a social insurance program like we talked about where workers pay in a little bit. This is dollars out of your paycheck, not a huge investment. And then employers pay in a little bit. You create this pooled insurance fund, use it when you need it. The other model, which would have happened in 21, was for it to be fully funded by revenue from the federal government, and it would have been raised by making the wealthiest corporations and Americans pay their fair share. And I'm sure you've heard these stories that so many of the companies in the United States pay zero in taxes. So it would be trying to correct for that.
Which is why it might not happen right now.
I mean, there's
you never know.
There's been business pushback, which is too bad because it's a lot of these bigger business lobbies like Chamber of Commerce lobbied against the bill when it would be in the individual company's interest actually at the end of the day.
So tell me more about the lobbying against it, because this is something that I don't think the American public has access to. If you dig you can find things. Like I found out that the formula companies lobby against paid leave, which really drives me crazy. Who else is lobbying against paid leave, and how can people learn more about that?
Well, and I always have to say, yes, I mean, historically, big formula has been horrendous. I think continue to be. Bobby, if you are breastfeeding, has been a long-term partner of ours in advocating for paid leave. So I have to say, it's like not everybody. So I think the biggest opposition has been the Chamber of Commerce, because they were against this bill that could have passed. They spent a lot of money lobbying and pushing back against it, and were ultimately successful. So it's important to know, again, Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of these businesses that they represent talk a lot about equity and promoting women in the workplace and talk about values, but then are part of an entity that killed one of the most powerful vehicles for actually facilitating that. And then, the funny thing is, I mean, opposition, show me a person who says they're against paid leave. You're not going to find that. Even Manchin didn't exactly say he was against it. So there is universal support on paper, but I think it comes down to, not shockingly, sort of this divide about the role of government, how big government should be, the spending, although what I always like to point out is that a lot of people who say they're against government are just against the programs they don't want. So some of the biggest parts of government are corporate welfare, the money that goes to big, huge businesses. It's defense spending. It's so it's not just it's not wasteful like sometimes it's portrayed. I mean, these are vital services that we should be investing in. So opposition, I think it's just the tragic grind of Washington, D.C. right now. And then, a few really powerful business lobbies.
Yeah, I think it's what helps me understand it is, and this is my belief, the role of a business is to make as much money for its shareholders as an entity. And the role of the government is to help kind of regulate those policies for those businesses in belief of the people. And so the pushback you're getting is from the system of the companies, because it's their role is to make as much money. They're saying, I don't want to give any money out for paid leave for all, when in fact, as you point out, that'll actually make them more money because they'll have better workers. But it's kind of like this scared belief. And so that's what motivates the people, saying, hey, I need to make more money for my shareholders. This appears like it's going to cost me money, so I'm going to fight it.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
I mean, I was talking to a small business owner recently that was like, I just simply can't afford to do that. Like, how are you going to ask the small business to do that?
And they're right. Which is why we want this federal model where it helps them shoulder the cost, so they're not, paying for it fully out of pocket. I do think that businesses individually should do the right thing because it is in their interest. But I understand, particularly when you're a really small, really small Main Street business, that's hard, and that's why we need the support of a federal program.
Mm-hmm.
So what action steps can listeners and people out there take if they are interested in not only learning more, but getting behind this and advocating for this?
We need you, yes. So first I would say, just because it's great to stay on top of the issue and what's happening, to follow Paid Leave for All. We're on most of the platforms. I don't know, platforms are all getting crazy these days. But it's just Paid Leave for All spelled out. We try to give kind of regular updates and ways that, actions you can take. I think the most important thing you can do, aside from voting in every election, voting for pro-paid leave candidates, is to make sure that your representatives are hearing from you. And a reminder that they do work for you. You are their boss. So you have a lot of power. And I think people don't realize this, but offices count phone calls they get. There's an awareness of the number of emails they get. That is something that is clocked and registered and does actually influence them. So you can call, it's actually a congressional switchboard. Let's see if I can remember this. 202-224-3121. I'm 99% sure it's correct. And they will actually just, direct you to your senator or your representative. What was the
website you had recently? The app or the?
The app and website was 5 calls. And so it gives you scripts and phone numbers of who to call based on where you're located, so who your representatives are. So you type in your zip code, and then it says, your senators, your House of Representatives, representative, and then a script on whatever issue is important to you. And then you can make your calls.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to start.
Yeah, and it's going to be a staffer who picks up, so you can honestly say whatever you want. It might make their day if it's kind of spicy. And just say that you want them to fight for paid leave. You want them to do what it takes to move the issue along. Also, our website you can do within 2 clicks, send a note. It'll find, same thing, it's a tool that will direct you to your electeds, and you can send a note to them.
Do you think it's more valuable? I feel like years ago I heard that it's more valuable to like either write a letter or call versus an email.
I think that's probably true just because I imagine it gets really flooded and spammed. And,
Yeah.
But I would say do whatever you can.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Could you, I'm curious, a bit kind of somewhat shifting topics. I'm curious in your day to day as you're driving this action, like when you are like boots on the ground, what is it like trying to, talk to politicians? What's your daily activity or weekly, or, monthly? Like, curious how you actually like get the work done or get the message out.
Yeah. So, because it's advocacy is, I don't think everyone understands what that is. I have to explain it to even family members. So I can speak on behalf of our campaign. We have a bunch of working groups. So we were founded by a number of national organizations that have been fighting for this for years, who wanted to kind of come together and be better coordinated, kind of supercharge their efforts. But they had already had these working groups, so policy. So those people are experts, help draft the language in a policy, work on the bill text, do research, do a lot of liaising with committees in Congress to help and to provide feedback and technical assistance. There is legislative work, lobbying, government relations, which is, talking to these representatives, doing whatever you can to engage them, keep asking, finding the right sort of other outside groups that they listen to and care about to try to move them, thinking sort of about, okay, like who are their constituents, who would make the biggest impact. We also do a lot of communications. Obviously, it's a lot of not just social media, but working with earned media, trying to keep paid leave in the conversation, in the headlines, making sure that, a lot of what makes things succeed is simply repetition. There's a funny thing about how top 40 songs are usually top 40 because they just are played the most, and that there's something about our brains really like to see things we're familiar with. We talk about gas prices so often because we see them on every street corner. So how do we keep paid leave in front of people, relevant, on top of their minds? So comms, and then field. So making sure that we are working with groups that are in communities, particularly in states or targets where we need to have extra pressure on elected officials, making sure that they're doing events, that they're holding constituent meetings, that they're making phone calls and knocking on doors. So there's a lot of components to it, and we try to cover it all.
Wow. That's much more than I thought. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Well, I love that there's just examples from around the world that you can look at. That, if anyone says, well, I'd like to see a case study, it's like, okay, well, here are hundreds of case studies. I mean, a big influence on choosing France, I know we didn't end up staying, but they did have a good family leave policy. And even at that point, it was one of the lower end ones in Europe. Some countries like the Nordic countries have a year of paid leave, and France had 20 weeks, which seemed like a real dream, even, compared to 0 here.
I think the last time I looked, Estonia may have been the country with the most, but I can't remember exactly how many weeks.
And I think Czech Republic has 3 years.
Oh, dear God. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we can do it. There are plenty of examples out there.
Well, and also I think it's important to point out that we know it works from around the world, absolutely, but also we know it works from states. Lest you think it's this, wild socialist nightmare, we have 13 states in the District of Columbia who've passed policies. A lot of them have been around for decades. And they're working. And like in California, it's been around so long, we have all these studies about how it's impacting businesses and how much people are enjoying the benefits. So it's important to remember that we have a lot of evidence. of what works and how well it works. And actually, we pulled from all of those different policies to create the federal model that we have.
I know I was a little shocked, not shocked, but just confused when I moved to California and started working there, and I had employees, and they were like, "Oh, we're taking FMLA," and I'm like, "What is that?" And started to understand, and I was like, "Oh, okay."
Well, that's even different, though. The FMLA is the family medical leave that you can, keep your job but not get paid.
But that's collective. That's for everything. That's the Leave Act.
Well, what's funny about FMLA is it was the anniversary yesterday. It was the 32nd anniversary of it, and it was meant to be paid leave. But in the negotiations, it got whittled down to unpaid leave that was just essentially job protection. Also a note, it only covers about half of the workforce. So it was meant to be sort of, let's do the first step and then quickly follow up with the paid part. And it's been 32 years. So we've got some catching up to do.
Yeah, I'd say. Well, thank you so much for leading the brigade.
Well, there's a lot of us, but yes, and thank you for what you've done to lift this up, keep the conversation going. As I said, that repetition is so important, that visibility is so important, and bringing, I think, the humor helps as well. So thank you.
The humor and satire, yes, and more to come on that.
I'm curious, how did you end up in DC doing this? Like, what was your background before?
So I have worked sort of always in gender is a passion of mine, trying to figure out why we're so behind in this country. But politics and policy. So I've had a number of jobs. Was with Planned Parenthood Action Fund in 2016 that worked on the campaign that was helping to coordinate with Hillary Clinton. Worked at People for the American Way for a bit. Worked at Supermajority, the women's organization, when it launched. Worked abroad a bit as well. Lived in London, did some work in gender in Armenia, had paid leave there, what was clear to me, though, in all of my travels and all of my work is that, people often think, oh, I have to go help those poor women in this country, X, Y, or Z, and don't have an awareness of truly how bad it is here and how behind we are. And I think it's important, again, a lot of people don't realize that so many of us don't have paid leave, that 1 in 4 women have gone back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth in this country, that many of us have no protections when, as we said, the sandwich generation really, really grows and expands, that we're not going to be able to take care of our parents, that 1 in 4 of us, only 1 in 4 of us has paid family leave through an employer. So, it just hit me when I started working in this position that this is one of the most desperate needs in America.
How do you, I can see a typical American with their mindset of this is how it's supposed to be. This is it's almost, I almost feel like there's maybe I'm going to stereotype a little bit. Like there might be like women who've gone through it in the past. Let's just say this. I almost feel like there's a pressure from the previous generation who didn't have any benefits, and they're hearing these 2 relatively new mothers saying like, hey, we can change this. And they're going, no, this is how it is. Like, just toughen up and get through it. How do you try to break down those mental barriers? Because there's definitely a resistance when you go to someone and you say, and you bring up the topic of paid leave for all. And the first thing you're going to say is, it's too expensive, can't do it. Or you have that person who's like, that's not how it is. We're tough Americans. We can get through it.
I sacrificed for my family. You can too.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, it's funny. Sometimes we joke that maybe we should call it paid leave for you. So I think the way you have to, just naturally we're selfish people. And in America, we don't have the same sort of, again, that same mindset of having so many neighbors and having so many shared resources and community being so close. We're cowboys and with bootstraps and all this. So I think a lot of it has to be, how does this relate to you? So that's why often I say, well, maybe you didn't have it when you were a parent, but don't you want your child to have it when you get sick? And don't you want, like, how do we change this conversation so it continues to feel relevant? And if men feel like, oh, this is a women's issue, say, well, maybe you'll have a heart attack in 10 years. Like, don't you want someone to be able to take the time to be there for you? So to me, it's just thinking about how do we keep flipping the conversation to feel relevant. And yeah, if you're not planning to give birth, maybe you'll be ill one day. How to be clear that when we say all, we mean all, because every single one of us is going to need to give and receive care at some point. So.
Well
Very
said.
good. Yeah.
That answer your question?
Yes, I mean it's such a tough thing to do to get people. We live in a world now where we're so polarized, and to have conversations, even with loved ones. You just sent me that thing where it's like facts don't change minds, like empathy and walking in someone's shoes and building the rapport and the relationship is kind of how you change the mind. And so exactly, I was just curious because the way you said it is that it's that like, well, it's for you and understanding, helping people understand like this is going to affect you personally. I always think it comes from Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's one, it's like the first or second chapter, where he says, it's like imagine someone hands you a picture of that you're in, and you're with friends. Like, what do you look at first? And everyone looks at themselves, and it's the same thing when you're trying to relate to people. You have to relate it to them.
So it's funny, I have to tell a real quick story because that reminds me of when we launched, or as we were getting ready to launch, we did a quick site visit to Washington State and they were just rolling out a new paid leave program. And the building where these people worked that were implementing it, when you walked in through the hallway, the walls were completely covered with photographs of their own families. And they said this was to remind them every day when they walked in. And these are, they're not all the most glamorous jobs. You're taking claims, you're registering benefits. It reminded them why they did the work. And so it inspired me. And I said, well, I think this will be our branding. And if you look at, a lot of our website or the background images on Twitter or whatever else, I said it should be a collage of families, of humanity, so that anyone looking at it might say, oh, that reminds me of my situation. That looks like me, or that's my family. So that's something that we felt really strongly was part of the ethos, that this has to be something that feels both very relatable to you and helps you understand you're a part of something much bigger.
It's not that we're talking about insurance, but when we moved to France, I kind of made the joke, and I wanted to somehow share this about like the idea of like there's no GoFundMe's here. Like, and people would say like, oh, it's just such a typical thing that we have a GoFundMe for so and so got in a motorcycle crash, or so and so has cancer. Like they're horrible situations. Yeah. But that's our insurance. We live in this lottery type lifestyle where it's like we just hope we don't get a major injury. Yeah. And we all think we won't, but we all know someone who has. And it wasn't in their control. It was outside their control. And so these things like FMLA, like insurance, like all these things that are fundamental to society in certain countries, we look at with this cowboy type attitude and say, not for us, like not for me. It's never going to happen to me. Right. And it's like, no, this is for you. This is exactly for you. And it's sad it's so frustrating when you see the other side, when you can kind of understand like how it works out. And like actually those GoFundMes, they make me sad and they make me upset at the same time because they just remind me of the shortcomings as a country that we have. Right. Because we are the wealthiest country in the world, and here we are depending on, the poorest to kind of pull out of their pockets to kind of help someone out.
Yeah. You got it. So
so sorry.
Well,
that's why we're fighting.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Just a ramble.
No.
When it comes to belief systems, they're so tied to our identities. And that's where I think it's so tough when you approach people with facts and they still don't want to hear it. So when it comes to the communications that you put out as Paid Leave for All, how do you approach like the belief system and identity factor and the psychology behind influencing people's brains into being more open-minded about this?
Yeah. Well, not a surprise to anyone that, yes, what influences people the most are stories. Stories are what move us. They are what we remember, actually. It's what our brain can remember best. So we focus on that a lot. Ideally, anytime you give a speech, anytime there's an article, there's some element of story to it. And then also I think some of it is just, going back to kind of comms 101, it's your audience and your message. You target it depending on who you're trying to reach and get to relate to it. So we certainly have different talking points depending if we're speaking to military families, or if we're talking to small businesses, or if we're talking to new moms. You do have to think about, how to say something that they can understand and relate to and that feels relevant and moves them.
You have always had this, I can see this empathetic side, also this like passionate side. What was it that built this empathy at such an early age?
God, I don't know.
Well, you said you've been fighting. It seems like you've been fighting for the less privileged. I mean, through your history. What triggered that?
I should probably give some credit to my parents. I don't know. Also I come from a really interesting multicultural family. I was just always growing up around all different kinds of people with all different kinds of backgrounds from all different kinds of walks of life. My father grew up on a farm. My mother is Lebanese and Armenian. We ate a lot of, Middle Eastern food growing up, and then we'd go have fried catfish in Illinois. And I'm also the youngest. I have 3 older brothers. And I think in a lot of, I'm sure family dynamics really have a lot to do with how you grew up, and they're formative. And it just made me very aware, even at a young age, of, again, sort of the differences of gender and power in this country. I don't know.
Sounds like all of that contributed for sure. Mm. And then what was your time like? You said you lived in London.
Yeah, so I did. I studied gender and policy at the London School of Economics, which was really fascinating. People from all over the world, and again, once reinforced even more how backwards we are in the United States. And loved London. It's a really fun city. Yeah.
Wow. So all of these great experiences, stateside and abroad, brought you here.
Yeah.
And here we are. Well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of this. This has been very insightful.
This has been great. And everyone can find Dawn Huckelbridge on Paid Leave for All on social media and online.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dawn.
It was fun to talk to you.
It was great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. These are great free ways to support this podcast. Also, please subscribe to this podcast on both Spotify and Apple. On both of those platforms, you can leave us up to a 5-star review, which would help us out greatly. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned in today's episode. That's the best way to support this show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please put those in the comment sections in YouTube. And yes, we do read all the comments.